With $8 in her coat pocket and a cracked suitcase held shut with a belt, 72-year-old Rosa Mendez stood at the end of her own driveway and watched her son pull the front door close behind him. Not gently. The house she had lived in for 38 years, the house where she had cooked 10,000 meals, buried a husband, and raised 2 children who had just told her she was too much to deal with, was no longer hers. It hadn't been for 6 months, technically, but today was the day they made it real. What Victor and Diane could not have known, what no one in that corner of upstate New York would have believed if you told them, was that the gutted farmhouse Rosa would buy 4 days later for $8 at a county tax auction would contain something hidden inside its walls for over a century, something that would pull historians, researchers, and eventually the state government itself to a forgotten stretch of road called Blackwood Mill Road, and would turn a woman everyone had written, often as someone no one could ignore. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Rosa Mendez had not always been the kind of woman who needed help. For most of her adult life, she had been the one doing the helping. She was born in 1951 in a small town in western Pennsylvania, the third of 5 children in a family where money was always tight and complaining about it was considered a waste of breath. She had married at 26 a quiet, steady man named George who worked in civil engineering and had a talent for fixing things with his hands. They settled in Grover Falls, a small town about 40 miles north of Albany, New York, and built a life the slow, ordinary way. A 3-bedroom house on a quarter-acre. A vegetable garden George kept every summer. 2 children born 2 years apart, Victor in 1977 and Diane in 1979. George died of a stroke in the spring of 2017. He was 68. Rosa was 65. The years after his death were harder than she let on to anyone. She stayed in the house because leaving it felt like erasing him. She kept the garden going even though her knees made it difficult. She managed the property taxes, the utility bills, and the slow parade of maintenance issues that come with an aging house on a fixed income. Her Social Security check was $1,340 a month. It was enough, barely, if she was careful. Victor lived 90 minutes away in a suburb of Albany. He worked in insurance, had a wife named Kendra, and 2 teenage boys. He called on Sundays, usually for about 10 minutes. Diane lived closer, 40 minutes away in Saratoga Springs, worked as an office manager for a dental practice, and visited perhaps once every 6 weeks. Both children were, by any ordinary measure, doing fine. The trouble started in the winter of 2022. Rosa had a fall on the back porch, nothing serious, a bruised hip and a badly frightened neighbor who had seen her go down through the fence. She spent 2 nights in the hospital for observation and came home with instructions to be careful on icy surfaces, which she considered obvious advice she had managed to follow for 7 decades without being told. Victor drove up the following weekend. He walked through the house with an expression Rosa recognized, but couldn't quite name. The look of a person calculating something they haven't decided to say out loud yet. "Mom, this place is a lot to manage," he said, standing in the kitchen. "I've been managing it," she said. "You fell. On ice. In February. It happens." He didn't argue. He helped her fix the porch railing that had come loose, ate dinner, and drove home. Rosa thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. 3 months later, in April of 2023, Victor and Diane arrived together on a Saturday morning. Rosa had made coffee and assumed they were coming for a visit. They sat down at the kitchen table, and the way they sat, arranged across from her, like 2 people at a meeting, told her before anyone spoke that this wasn't a visit. "We've been talking," Victor began, "about what makes sense going forward." Rosa set her coffee cup down. What they proposed was straightforward, presented with the careful, practiced tone of people who had rehearsed it. The house was paid off. It was worth, according to Victor, somewhere between $310,000 and $340,000 in the current market. If Rosa signed it over to them now, they could sell it, use the proceeds to place her in an assisted living facility in Saratoga, and avoid the legal complications of probate later. "You'd have your own room," Diane said. "They have activities. There's a garden club." Rosa looked at her daughter. "I have a garden." "Mom, Diane's voice had the particular flatness of someone who has decided to stop pretending. You can't keep doing this alone. The house is too much. You're 72 years old. You fell this winter. Once. What happens when it's something worse? Victor said, what happens when you can't get up? We're not always going to be able to get here in time. Rosa asked about the cost of the facility. Victor slid a brochure across the table. The monthly fee was $2,900. Rosa's Social Security was $1,340. She asked where the difference would come from. The house sale, Victor said. There'd be enough to cover several years, and by then Diane and I can reassess. Reassess, Rosa repeated. Mom, we're trying to help. She sat quietly for a moment, looking at the two of them. She thought about the nights she had stayed up with Victor when he had pneumonia at 9 years old, the hours she had spent helping Diane practice for her college entrance exams, the decades of ordinary love that she had assumed created something durable. If I sign the house over to you, she said, and you sell it, I have no home and no say in where I end up. You be taken care of, Diane said. That's not what I asked. The conversation went in circles for another hour. At some point, the word burden entered the room. Rosa wasn't certain which of them said it first. It didn't matter much. Once it was there, it sat on the table between them like something that couldn't be put away. She signed the papers 6 weeks later, in late May. She told herself she was being practical. She told herself they were right, that the house was too much. She told herself that trust was the foundation of family, and that signing a document was not the same as giving up. She was wrong about all of it. The call came on a Thursday in September. Victor's voice was brisk, not unkind, but with the efficiency of someone working through a list. The sale had gone through faster than expected. The buyer wanted possession by October 15th. Rosa would need to be moved into the Saratoga facility by then. He would send a truck for the larger furniture. Rosa asked about the deposit for the facility, the one she had been told would come from the sale proceeds. There was a pause. We're going to need a little time to sort out the finances, Victor said. How much time? A few weeks. You can stay at the facility while we work it out. They're flexible. She called the facility the next day. They were not flexible. Without confirmed funding, they could not hold a room. Without a room, she had nowhere to go on October 15th. She called Victor back. The call went to voicemail. She called Diane. Diane answered, sounded harassed, and said she would talk to Victor and call back. She didn't call back. On the morning of October 15th, a moving crew arrived at 8 a.m. Rosa had packed what she could into 2 bags and an old hard-sided suitcase that had belonged to George's mother. The belt she used to keep it shut had been George's, brown leather, worn thin at the buckle. She stood on the driveway with her bags while strangers carried her furniture out of her house and loaded it into a truck bound for an auction house in Albany. Victor had sent a card. It was in her coat pocket. It said, "We love you, Mom. This is for the best." She had $8 in cash. Her bank account held $74, but the debit card was in her purse, and she couldn't bring herself to think about what $74 meant against the scale of what had just happened. The moving crew left without speaking to her. Rosa stood at the end of the driveway for a long time. A car passed, then another. No one stopped. She had no phone. She had canceled it 2 months earlier to save money, assuming the facility would have a landline she could use. She had the address of the facility in Saratoga written on a piece of paper in her coat pocket, but no way to get there and no room waiting for her when she arrived. She picked up her suitcase and her bags and started walking toward the center of Grover Falls. She had no plan. She had $8, a belt that had belonged to her late husband, and 38 years of a life that had just been carried away in a moving truck. What she did not have, not yet, was any idea that 4 days from now she would own something, that it would be hers in a way nothing had been hers in a very long time, and that what was hidden inside it had been waiting through 6 presidential administrations, 2 world wars, and a century of winters for someone to find it. Rosa walked into town with the suitcase handle cutting into her palm and the October wind coming off the hills with real intention behind it. Grover Falls was not a large town. It had a pharmacy, a diner, a hardware store, a post office, and a county administration building that doubled as the local courthouse on alternating Tuesdays. Rosa had lived here for 38 years and knew the layout the way you know a place you've stopped consciously seeing. She went to the diner first, not to eat, but to sit somewhere warm and think. The woman behind the counter, young, maybe 25, didn't recognize her. Rosa ordered a glass of water and nursed it for 40 minutes while she tried to work out what her options actually were. Social services was one. She knew the county had an emergency housing office somewhere in the administration building. She had never needed it. The thought of walking in there, explaining what her children had done, sitting across from a caseworker half her age and describing how she had signed away her own house, made something harden in her chest. She was still sitting there when the man at the next table folded his newspaper and left it on the chair beside him. He was in a hurry, coat half on before he reached the door, and the paper stayed behind. Rosa looked at it without meaning to. It was the Grover Falls Gazette, 2 days old. The bottom half of the front page had been folded back, exposing part of the classified section underneath. A box notice, small, maybe 3 inches of column space, caught her eye because of a single word in the heading. Auction. She pulled the paper toward her and read. The county was holding a tax delinquency auction on Friday afternoon, 2 days away, at the administration building on Church Street. Properties that had gone 3 or more years without tax payment were being offered for a minimum opening bid of $1 each. There were 11 properties on the list. Buyers assumed all liabilities. No warranties. Cash or money order only. Rosa read the list of properties twice. Most of them were vacant lots or commercial parcels. One was described as a residential structure on Blackwood Mill Road, listed as a farmhouse, approximately 1,400 square feet, built circa 1902. She was feeling something closer to fury, slow and cold, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that makes decisions. She was 72 years old. She had nowhere to sleep on Friday night. She had watched strangers carry her dining table out of her house that morning. Her son had sent her a card instead of a phone call. If she was going to have nothing, she was going to have it somewhere that was hers. Friday came cold and bright. Rosa had spent 2 nights at the Grover Falls Public Library, which opened at 8 a.m. and closed at 7 p.m., and the intervening hours on a bench outside the all-night laundromat on Elm Street, wrapped in a coat that wasn't quite heavy enough. She hadn't eaten much. She had $71 left in the bank and her $8 in cash, and she was keeping the cash intact because she had a use for it now. The auction was held in a ground-floor meeting room in the county building. Folding chairs had been set up in rows facing a low podium. By the time Rosa arrived at 1:40 p.m., dragging her suitcase, there were about 25 people in the room. Almost all of them were men, most of them in that particular uniform of the small-scale property investor. Fleece vest, work boots, clipboard with printed sheets of paper. They talked among themselves in the easy, familiar way of people who had done this before. Rosa found a chair near the back and sat down. A few people glanced at her. No one spoke to her. The auctioneer was a thin woman in her 60s named County Clerk Patricia Wald, reading from a printed sheet with the energy of someone who had 3 more meetings after this one. She went through the rules quickly. All sales final. All properties as is. Payment due within 30 minutes of sale. Cash or certified check. The first 9 properties moved fast. A vacant lot sold for $2,200. A commercial building with foundation damage went for $18,500. A residential lot without a structure on it brought $7,000. The investors bid with the shorthand efficiency of people spending other people's money, quick raises of the hand, no visible emotion. Rosa watched and counted her cash again under the edge of the table. $8. 5 ones and 3 singles. She smoothed them against her knee. Every head in the room turned. She was still holding the bills, smooth flat, slightly damp from her palm. Patricia Wald looked at her over the top of her reading glasses. I have $8 from the lady in the back. Anyone want to go to 9? The man near the front turned fully around in his chair to look at Rosa. He was maybe 45, heavy set, with a clipboard covered in handwritten notes. He looked at her suitcase. He looked at her coat. He looked at the money in her hand. He turned back around without bidding. $8 going once, Wald said. Going twice. She waited 5 full seconds. Nobody moved. Sold. Blackwood Mill Road property to the woman in the back for $8. Please come up to sign the transfer documents." Rosa walked to the front of the room through a silence that wasn't quite respectful and wasn't quite mocking. It was the silence of people watching something they don't know how to categorize. She laid her $8 on the table and signed where Patricia Wald pointed. The deed was a single page, county seal in the top corner. At the bottom, in the space for the new owner's name, Wald wrote in careful block letters, "Rosa Mendez." "You've got a map?" Wald asked. "No." Wald photocopied the property survey sheet and handed it across the table. "Road's rough. You'll need a vehicle with clearance. And ma'am," she stopped, "that structure is condemned. You cannot legally occupy it in its current state." "Understand," Rosa said. She tucked the deed and the map into her coat pocket, picked up her suitcase, and walked out of the county building into the October afternoon. She owned something. It was 9 miles away, condemned, without power or water, and she had no idea what she would find when she got there. She started walking. The map was hand-drawn on a photocopied survey sheet, and Rosa had to stop twice under streetlights to read it properly. Blackwood Mill Road wasn't marked on any of the road signs she passed. It branched off a county route called Mill Creek Road, itself branching off the main highway heading northwest out of Grover Falls, and the turn was easy to miss because the sign for it had lost one of its screws and hung at an angle that made it look like an arrow pointing at the ground. She had walked about 2 miles when a pickup truck slowed beside her. The driver was an older man, somewhere in his late 60s, with a white beard trimmed close and the hands of someone who had worked outdoors for most of his life. He leaned across the passenger seat and looked at her suitcase. "You headed somewhere specific, or just walking?" he asked. "Blackwood Mill Road," Rosa said. He was quiet for a second. "Nothing out there. There's a farmhouse." He looked at her for a moment. "Eugene Calla," he said. "About a place about a mile past the Mill Creek turn. Get in. I'll take you as far as I'm going." His name was Eugene Calla. He was 67, a retired carpenter who had spent 30 years doing restoration work on historic buildings across the Northeast and had moved back to Grover Falls a decade ago to be closer to his sister. He didn't ask many questions, which Rosa appreciated. He drove with the radio off and both hands on the wheel, navigating the increasingly rough road without complaint. When she told him she had just bought the farmhouse at the end of Blackwood Mill Road, he went quiet in a way that told her he knew the property. "That place has been empty since I moved back," he said. "Probably longer." "I know." He turned onto a dirt track that Rosa would not have identified as a road without the map in her hand. The truck's headlights swept through dense tree cover, branches scraping both mirrors. After a quarter-mile, the trees opened and the headlights hit the farmhouse. Eugene stopped the truck and left the engine running. Rosa looked. The farmhouse was a 2-story structure, or had been. The second story had partially collapsed on the right side, folding inward like a cardboard box left in the rain, so that the roofline ran level on the left and dropped sharply on the right into a tangle of broken timber and old slate shingles. The front porch was gone entirely, its boards rotted into the ground, leaving the front door accessible only by stepping up 2 feet onto the exposed foundation stone. Every window opening was empty, frames rotted out, nothing left but dark rectangles in the walls. The siding, wide wooden boards that had once been painted white, was gray and peeling, with sections missing entirely where the wood had simply given up. Vines had grown up the left wall and across part of the roof. Eugene cut the engine. "I'll help you get inside," he said. That was all. He had a flashlight in the glove box and a short crowbar behind the seat. They got the front door open after a few minutes of working the crowbar into the swollen frame. The smell that came out was old water, rot, and something animal, musky and sharp. Inside, the flashlight showed a main room about 20 feet across with a low ceiling, most of its plaster fallen. The floor was wide plank hardwood, buried under plaster chunks, leaves, animal droppings, and years of accumulated debris. A stone fireplace occupied the far wall, its hearth choked with debris, but its structure apparently intact. Off the main room were 2 doors, one to what had been a kitchen, one to a narrow staircase that Eugene tested with 1 foot and then left alone. "Don't go upstairs," he said. "Not until you know what's holding." The kitchen was smaller, with a rusted hand pump sink connected to nothing and a wood-burning range so corroded it had fused to the floor. The ceiling here was intact, which meant the right side collapse hadn't reached this far. Eugene went back to his truck and returned with a tarp, a length of rope, a wool blanket still in its plastic sleeve, and a battery-powered lantern. "I was bringing these to my sister," he said. "She doesn't need them." Rosa didn't argue. She had learned something in the past 4 days about the specific grace of accepting help without making it complicated for the person offering it. They spent an hour clearing the main room floor enough to create a space she could sleep in. Eugene used the tarp to cover the largest window opening, cutting the wind that moved through the ground floor in steady cold currents. He got a small fire going in the hearth with dry wood from a collapsed outbuilding behind the house, checking the flue first with a piece of burning newspaper and watching where the smoke went. Before he left, he stood in the doorway and looked at her. "I come this way most mornings," he said. "I'll stop tomorrow." "You don't have to." "I know," he said and left. Rosa listened to the truck engine fade through the trees. Then she sat down on the blanket in front of the fire with a lantern beside her and looked at her house. The firelight moved across the fallen plaster and the bare stone walls. Somewhere above her, something small was moving in what remained of the upper floor. Wind pressed against the tarp over the window and made it breathe in and out like something alive. The cold was still present, working in through the gaps in the walls and up through the floorboards. But the fire was real and the lantern was steady, and the deed in her coat pocket said Rosa Mendez at the bottom in block letters. She ate the last 2 crackers from sleeve she had bought 2 days ago at the library vending machine. She drank water from a plastic bottle Eugene had left without mentioning. She was 72 years old. She had $71 in a bank account she couldn't access without a working phone, and the $8 she had spent was gone. She owned a condemned farmhouse with a collapsed second story and no utilities 9 miles from town in October with winter coming. She pulled the blanket around her shoulders and watched the fire and felt, underneath the exhaustion and the cold and the full weight of what had happened to her, something she hadn't felt in months. She was not waiting for anyone to tell her what came next. Eugene came back the next morning at 7, as promised, with coffee in a thermos and a bag of groceries he said he had bought for himself and didn't need. Rosa accepted both without arguing and saved the argument for later, when she had more leverage. He walked the ground floor with her in the daylight, testing boards with his boot heel, checking the fireplace flue properly, looking at the walls with the particular attention of someone who had spent decades understanding how old buildings fail and why. "Bones are good," he said, crouching to look at the base of the stone fireplace. "Whoever built this knew what they were doing. The wood frame is white oak, most of it. That stuff doesn't quit easily. What's the worst problem? The right side of the upper floor. That needs to come down before it comes down on its own. Everything else is fixable if you're patient." Rosa asked him what patient meant in real terms. He said months, minimum, possibly longer depending on materials and weather. She told him she understood and asked if he knew anyone who needed work done, cleaning, cooking, anything she could do for pay within walking distance. He thought for a moment. "Patrice Owens runs the supply store on Mill Creek Road, about 4 miles back. Lost her helper last month. She mentioned it to me." Rosa walked to the supply store that afternoon. Patrice Owens was 58, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped gray hair and the direct manner of someone who had run a business alone long enough to stop softening her sentences. She looked Rosa over when she walked in, took in a suitcase parked outside the door, and asked without preamble what she could do. Rosa told her she was looking for work, any kind, and that she was reliable and available early. "How early?" Patrice asked. "Whatever time you open." 5:30. "Fine." Patrice studied her for another moment. "I open 5:30, close 2. I need someone to receive deliveries, stock shelves, clean the back room. I can pay $12 an hour for days a week." "It's not much. It's enough to start," Rosa said. She began the following Monday. 4 days a week. She was up before 4, on the road by 4:30 with Eugene's lantern, walking the 4 miles to Patrice's store in the dark along a road she was learning by feel as much as sight. She worked until 2, then walked back and spent the remaining daylight hours on the house. The first 2 weeks, she focused entirely on the ground floor. Working with a pine branch as a broom and her bare hands as a dustpan, she cleared the debris room by room, carrying it outside in loads and piling it away from the house. Her hands blistered, then the blisters tore, then the skin underneath hardened. Her back ached every morning for the first 10 days, then slowly, stubbornly, it stopped aching. Eugene came by every 2 or 3 days. He brought tools. He said he had extras of a proper broom, a handsaw, a hammer, a box of mixed nails. He didn't make a performance of the generosity, and Rosa didn't make a performance of receiving it. They worked alongside each other in a comfortable, practical silence that she found she preferred to most conversation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The window openings were the first real project. Rosa couldn't afford glass. What she could do was cut sections of the old wooden siding that had fallen from the exterior walls, pieces that were still solid despite their weathered surface, and fit them into the frames as shutters, hinged with strips of leather she cut from a ruined bag she found in the kitchen. They weren't beautiful. They kept the wind out and could be propped open during the day to let light in. That was enough. The fireplace became her stove. She learned to manage the draft, to build a fire that would hold for hours on a single load of wood rather than burning fast and hot, to bank coals at night so the morning startup was quicker. It was the one resource she had in abundance. The 3.1 acres around the farmhouse were dense with fallen timber, years of deadfall that she could cut and split with a hatchet Eugene left one afternoon without explanation. She foraged carefully, sticking to what she knew with certainty. Wild garlic grew along the creek she found 300 yards downhill from the house. Late-season apples hung on 2 trees behind the collapsed outbuilding, small and tart, but edible. Patrice started leaving day-old bread and slightly soft produce in a box by the back door of the store with no comment attached, and Rosa took it with no comment offered. By the end of the first month, the ground floor was clean, weather-tight, and livable in the way that the word livable stretches to cover situations it was never meant to describe. She had a sleeping area near the fireplace, a functional kitchen space with the wood range she had cleaned and coaxed back into partial use, and a rough wooden shelf she had built from salvage boards where she kept her food, her tools, and George's watch. She was not comfortable. She was surviving, which is a different thing, and she knew the difference. What she didn't know yet was what the house was about to show her. The second-floor collapse had been bothering Rosa since the first night, not because of the danger, though the danger was real, but because of the asymmetry of it. The left side of the upper floor was intact. Eugene had tested the staircase carefully in the 3rd week and declared the left side accessible if she was cautious and stayed away from the right. Rosa had gone up once, briefly, to assess what was there. 2 small rooms, their floors warped but solid, their ceilings partially open to the sky where the slate roof had slid away. She had come back down and focused on the ground floor. In late November, 6 weeks after moving in, she went back up. Her reason was practical. The left side rooms, if she could make them weather-tight, would give her a second space away from the main room, somewhere to store materials, somewhere that wasn't also her kitchen and bedroom and workshop. She brought the lantern and the hammer and a box of nails and spent a morning assessing what could be done. The larger of the 2 rooms had a ceiling mostly intact and a floor that felt solid across most of its surface. The single window opening faced east and still had its original frame, dry and gray but unrotted. The walls were plaster over wood lath, the plaster largely fallen but the lath still nailed in place. Along the interior wall, opposite the window, there was a built-in cupboard. It was a simple piece of carpentry, floor to ceiling, about 4 feet wide, with 2 doors whose latches had rusted shut. Rosa worked the latch on the left door with a flathead screwdriver for several minutes before it gave. The door swung open, releasing air that smelled of old wood and something drier underneath, like paper kept in the dark for a long time. The cupboard was not empty. On the top shelf, wrapped in what had been a canvas drop cloth and tied with wax cord, was a bundle roughly the size of a large dictionary. On the middle shelf was a flat wooden case, the kind used for drafting instruments, its brass latch green with age. On the bottom shelf were two glass jars with metal lids, sealed, containing something Rosa couldn't identify without opening them, a dark, dried substance that might have been pigment or might have been something else entirely. She lifted the bundle from the top shelf carefully, set it on the floor, and untied the wax cord. The canvas unrolled stiffly and revealed a stack of papers, large sheets, roughly 18 by 24 inches, rolled together and flattened under the weight of the canvas over what was clearly a very long time. Rosa unrolled the top sheet with both hands, holding the edges flat against the floor. It was a drawing. Done in ink on heavy paper, precise and detailed, it showed the elevation of a building she didn't recognize, a public structure of some kind, with columns and a wide entrance stair and measurements annotated in a small, exact hand. In the lower right corner, in the same handwriting, was a date and a name. October 1909. C. Marsh. She unrolled the next sheet. Another elevation, different building, same precise line work, same signature. Then another. Then another. The stack contained 23 sheets in total, all architectural drawings, all signed C. Marsh, spanning dates from 1906 to 1914. She opened the drafting case next. Inside, nested in a fitted velvet interior that had once been green and was now gray, were drawing instruments. A set of ruling pens, a compass with interchangeable points, a pair of proportional dividers, all brass, all tarnished, all intact. Beneath the instruments, she found something she had not expected. A letter, folded into thirds, the paper brittle at the creases but unbroken. She opened it with the care of someone handling something that had waited long enough. The handwriting was different from the drawing annotations, looser, more hurried, written in faded brown ink. If you were reading this, then the house found the right person before I could come back for it. I am leaving these here because there is nowhere else safe to put them, and I cannot take them with me. They're my work. All of it. 8 years of work. I was not allowed to sign my name to any of it when it was built. That is the truth, and I want it written down somewhere, even if only a stranger reads it. My name is Clara Marsh. I designed these buildings. I am a woman, and in 1914, that was considered reason enough to give the credit to someone else. I don't know if that will ever change. I hope it does. The drawings are the proof. Keep them safe. Rosa sat on the warped floor of the second-floor room with the letter in her hands and read it twice. Then she sat quietly for a long time, listening to the wind moving through the trees outside and the old house settling around her, and somewhere below, the fire she had built that morning still burning steadily in the stone hearth. She knew what she had found. She didn't know yet what it would mean, but she knew it mattered, the way you know certain things before you can explain them, in your chest before your head catches up. She folded the letter carefully along its original creases and held it against her coat. "I've got you," she said quietly, to no one, to Clara Marsh, to the room. Rosa told Eugene first, the following morning when he stopped by with a bag of wood screws and no explanation for why he had them. She brought him upstairs and showed him the drawings spread across the floor, the drafting case, the letter. He read the letter standing up, holding it at arm's length the way people do when they've left their glasses in the truck. He was quiet for a long moment after he finished. "Clara Marsh," he said. "You know the name?" "No, but I know the situation. Woman does the work, man gets the credit. Wasn't uncommon then. Still isn't." He handed the letter back carefully. "These drawings, the buildings on them. You need someone who knows architectural history to identify them. Do you know anyone?" He thought for a moment. "Dr. Leonard Hua. He teaches at the State University in Albany History Department. I did some restoration work on one of their campus buildings a few years back. He was the one who told me what we were looking at when we opened up the walls." "Sure, man. Careful. Would he come out here?" "Send him a photograph first. If he's interested, he'll come." He asked if he could visit the following week. Rosa told Eugene to tell him yes. Dr. Leonard Hua arrived on a Tuesday in early December, driving a sensible sedan that bottomed out twice on the unpaved track to the farmhouse. He was 54, slight, with rectangular glasses and a canvas bag over one shoulder that clinked with the sound of equipment. He shook Rosa's hand at the door and looked at the house with the focused attention of someone filing information away, rather than forming opinions. He spent 4 hours with the drawings. He photographed each one individually with a camera that was not a phone. He examined the paper under a loupe. He compared the ink color and line quality across different sheets. He measured the lettering against samples he had brought from the university archive, printed copies of documents known to be from the same period. He read the letter 3 times and photographed it from 4 angles. At the end of the 4 hours, he sat down across from Rosa at the rough table in the main room and took off his glasses and cleaned them, which she had already identified as something he did when he was organizing his thoughts. "The paper dates correctly," he said. "The ink oxidation is consistent with documents from that period. The drafting style matches the known executed buildings in ways that would be extraordinarily difficult to fabricate. And the letter," he put his glasses back on, "the handwriting matches a signature I found in the Albany City Building permit records 3 years ago that I couldn't identify. A.C. Marsh, listed as a drafting assistant on 2 permit applications from 1908. I noted it because the handwriting was too precise for a junior position, and then I moved on. I shouldn't have moved on. What does this mean for the buildings?" Rosa asked. "It means 2 significant public buildings in Albany have the wrong name on their history. That's a correction that needs to be made formally through the historical record, through the architectural registry. It also means Clara Marsh, who was apparently written out of her own work during her lifetime, gets written back in." He looked around the main room, at the cleared floor and the fireplace and the salvage board shelf with George's watch on it. "This house," he said, "do you know when it was built?" 1902. It's on the deed. Clara Marsh was working in this region from 1906. If this was her residence, the house itself may be historically significant as her base of operation. He paused. "Mrs. Mendez, I'd like to bring this to the State Historical Preservation Office. With your permission. The drawings stay here. Everything stays here. Nothing moves without your agreement. But this needs to go through official channels to be properly recognized." Rosa looked at him steadily. "The house is mine. The drawings are mine. Nothing happens without my say." "Understood completely." "Then yes," she said. "Let's do it properly." By August, the second story was whole again. The roof was reshingled in slate to match the original. The windows had glass. The porch was rebuilt from photographs Eugene found in the County Historical Archive, 2 images of the farmhouse taken in 1911 that showed it as it had originally looked, white-painted, solid, a working woman's house at the edge of the woods. The State University established a formal research partnership with the property, giving Rosa a modest monthly stipend as the site's official caretaker and archivist. 2 of the Albany buildings whose attributions were corrected put up new historical plaques acknowledging Clara Marsh as their designer. A architectural history journal published a paper co-authored by Dr. Hua and Rosa, her name listed first because Dr. Hua had insisted and Rosa had not argued. Patrice kept her on at the store 2 mornings a week because Rosa asked her to. She liked the walk. She liked the work. She liked Patrice. Eugene had a key to the farmhouse by then, though neither of them had made a formal arrangement about it. He came and went as needed, which turned out to be often. Rosa was no longer surviving. She was living in a house she had saved with her own hands, in a life she had built from $8 and a deed and a letter written by a woman who had trusted a stranger to find it. Victor and Diane found out through a newspaper. The article ran in the Albany Times-Union on a Saturday in late September, 14 months after Rosa had stood at the end of her driveway in Grover Falls watching strangers carry her furniture away. It was not a long piece, half a page in the weekend edition, but it had a photograph. Rosa standing in front of the restored farmhouse, one hand on the porch railing, looking directly at the camera with an expression the photographer had caught without trying to, the particular look of someone who has nothing left to prove and knows it. The headline read, "Grover Falls Woman Uncovers Lost Legacy of Forgotten Architect in $8 Farmhouse." Rosa didn't see the article herself until Patrice brought a copy to the store on Monday morning and set it on the counter without comment. Rosa read it with her coffee, noted 2 factual errors she would mention to Dr. Hua, and put it in her bag to keep. Victor called Eugene's phone 11 days later because he had no other way to reach her. Eugene handed Rosa the phone with a look that asked nothing and she took it outside and stood on the porch steps in the early October cold. "Mom." Victor's voice carried the careful warmth of someone who had practiced the call before making it. "Victor, we saw the article. Diane and I both saw it." A pause. "We've been trying to find a way to reach you." "Eugene's number has been the same for 30 years, Rosa said. "It wasn't hard to find." Another pause. "We wanted to come see you, if that's all right." She thought about it for a moment, not because she was uncertain, but because she wanted to be fair to herself about what she was agreeing to. "Come Saturday," she said. "Come in the morning." They arrived at 10, in Victor's dark green SUV, which looked out of place on the unpaved track the way expensive things often do in honest surroundings. Rosa was in the garden when she heard the engine, a small plot she had cleared on the south side of the house in June, where she was growing garlic, kale, and 4 varieties of tomato. She straightened up, brushed her hands on her trousers, and waited. Victor got out first. He had put on weight since she had last seen him. He was dressed casually, too casually, the way people dress when they want to seem relaxed. Diane followed, thinner than Rosa remembered, with the careful expression of someone who had thought extensively about this moment and wasn't sure any of the preparation had been adequate. They looked at the farmhouse. Rosa watched them look. She could see them taking in the restored porch, the new slate roof, the glass windows, the historical landmark sign mounted on a post near the track. She could see the calculation moving behind Victor's eyes before he had said a single word to her. "Mom," Diane said, and her voice broke slightly on the word. "This place is beautiful." "It is," Rosa agreed. "I had $8, she said. "When you closed that door, I had $8, a suitcase, and nowhere to go. I slept on a library bench. I slept outside a laundromat. I bought this house at a county auction because it was the only thing in the world I could afford, and I moved into a condemned building in October with no heat and no water because it was the only alternative to having nothing at all." Victor started to say something. Rosa kept going, not loudly. "I'm not telling you that so you'll feel worse than you already do. I'm telling you because I want you to understand what the actual bottom looked like, not a version that's easier to hear." She looked at her son directly. "You call me a burden. You and your sister sat across from me at my own kitchen table, and the word you used for me was burden." Diane looked up. Her eyes were wet. "I know. I want you to understand something about this house," Rosa continued. "I sealed those windows with my own hands. I carried water from a creek. I got that would range working with steel wool and patience and nothing else. I did all of that at 72 years old, alone, in November, because you left me no other option. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, I found something in an upstairs cupboard that turned out to matter, and it mattered because I was here to find it, because nobody else wanted this place." She let that settle. "Are you going to sell it?" Victor asked. His voice was careful, stripped of the warmth it had carried when he arrived. The question told Rosa everything she needed to know about what had brought them here underneath the apology. "No," she said. "The historical designation, the research partnership, there must be offers." "There are. I've declined them all." "I believe you," Rosa said. "Both of you, I believe you're sorry." She stood up from her chair, which signaled the end of the visit without requiring her to announce it. "I'm not ready to rebuild something with you," she said. "That may change. I don't know yet. But I'm not closing the door on it entirely, which is more than you gave me when you closed yours." She looked at them both. "That's where I am. You could decide what to do with it." Victor nodded once tight. Diane stood and for a moment looked like she might reach for Rosa's hand, then didn't. They walked back to the SUV. Victor started the engine. Diane looked back once through the window as they turned onto the track, and Rosa raised one hand, a gesture that wasn't quite a wave, wasn't quite a dismissal, and let it mean both things at once. She stood on the porch until the engine sound was gone and the woods were quiet again. Eugene appeared from around the side of the house where he had been repointing the foundation stones, a job that didn't need doing that particular morning, but that he had invented a reason to be present for. "You all right?" he asked. Rosa considered the question properly before answering it. "Yes," she said. "I actually am." Rosa turned 73 in December, 6 weeks after Victor and Diane drove back down the unpaved track and out of her immediate life. The birthday was a Saturday, cold and bright, the kind of upstate New York winter day where the sky is so clear it looks artificial and the snow on the ground reflects light back upward, so everything is illuminated from two directions at once. Eugene arrived first at 8 in the morning with a box of tools wrapped in brown paper and a ribbon tied around it that he had clearly asked someone else to tie. Rosa unwrapped it at the kitchen table and found a set of wood chisels, good ones, the kind that hold an edge, and laughed for the first time in a while at the specific pleasure of a gift from someone who actually knows you. Patrice came at noon with a covered dish and a bottle of wine she said was from a vineyard 2 counties over that her cousin ran. She set both on the table and looked around the restored main room with the expression she always had when she visited, a kind of quiet satisfaction, as if the house's condition reflected something she felt personally responsible for, which in a way she was. Dr. Leonard Hua drove up from Albany in the early afternoon with his canvas bag over his shoulder and a flat package under his arm wrapped in brown paper. He sat on the table and sat down before Rosa could open it, which meant he wanted to explain it first. The journal came out last week, he said. The Architectural History Quarterly. The Clara Marsh paper. Rosa already knew. She had a copy on the shelf beside George's watch. What's in the package is something else, he said. The university had a print made from the original drawings. Rosa opened it. Inside was a large archival print of Clara Marsh's most complete elevation drawing, the one showing the Albany building on State Street that now carried her name on its historical record. The line work was precise and exact, and the signature in the lower right corner, C. Marsh, 1909, was clear enough to read from across the room. Rosa held it for a moment without speaking. She should have been able to sign her own buildings, she finally said. Yes, Dr. Hua said. She should have. They ate at the long table Eugene had built in the spring from reclaimed oak, the same wood he had used for the porch bench, and which had the color and weight of something that intended to outlast everyone sitting around it. 6 people total. Eugene, Patrice, Dr. Hua, a graduate student of Dr. Hua's named Mara who had been coming out monthly to continue cataloging the Marsh drawings, and a woman named Dolores who ran the County Historical Society and had driven out twice to consult on the landmark documentation and stayed for dinner both times without needing much persuading. Rosa looked around the table while Patrice was telling a story about a delivery driver who had tried to convince her that the Mill Creek Road turnoff didn't exist and felt the specific texture of what she had built here. These were not people who had known her before. They had no history with the woman she had been when she was somebody's mother, somebody's widow, somebody's burden. They knew only the woman she had become in this house, and that woman was who she actually was, which turned out to be a significant difference. After dinner, when the dishes were done and the wine was finished and the winter dark had settled fully against the windows, Eugene stayed to help bank the fire for the night, while the others drove back toward town in a small convoy of headlights moving through the trees. Rosa stood on the porch in her coat and watched the lights disappear. Any word from your kids? Eugene asked from inside, not prying, just asking. Victor sent a card last week, she said. Just a card. His handwriting, not a printed thing. That's something. Maybe. I don't know yet. She came back inside and closed the porch door. I wrote back. Short. Told him the house was well, and I was well. Left it open. Eugene nodded and said nothing further about it, which was one of the things Rosa had come to value most about him, his understanding of when a subject had been given exactly the space it needed and didn't require more. She walked through the main room after he left, running her hand along the wall beside the fireplace the way she did most evenings. The plaster was new, but the stone underneath was original, laid in 1902 by someone whose name nobody had thought to record, and it held the warmth of the fire the way old stone does, releasing it slowly back into the room through the night. She stopped at the shelf and looked at George's watch beside the archival print of Clara Marsh's drawing, which she had propped there after dinner and would hang properly in the morning. 2 women who had been told their value was negotiable. One who had hidden her proof in a cupboard and hoped a stranger would find it. One who had found it at 72 with $8 and nowhere else to go. Rosa picked up George's watch and held it for a moment, the way she did when she wanted to talk to him without pretending she could. I found her, she said quietly, and I think she found me. She set the watch back on the shelf, turned off the lantern, and went to bed in the house she had saved, in the life she had built, in the knowledge that her worth had never actually been in question. Other people's failure to see it had never made it less real. She had known that all along, somewhere underneath everything. It had just taken a condemned farmhouse, $8 and one very long year to prove it to herself completely. The fire held through the night. It always did now. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.